Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, you've now heard from a number of different witnesses to the events of the Ides of Aprilis surrounding the alleged recovery of Mr. Jesus Josephson following his execution by the Roman occupying forces. Today we're considering a rather interesting account of two of Mr. Josephson's disciples, Mr. Cleopas and his companion. I have to say, Your Graces, we are not able to determine whether the companion is even male or female. The report is incredibly poor, and we will, of course, be trying to discover the name of the other companion so that we can gain a second eyewitness statement from them. Mr. Cleopas is walking with his companion from Jerusalem to Emmaus. It's a reasonable distance. I believe it's about 10 or 11 miles, which on foot is a reasonable walk. They have been present with the disciples of Mr. Josephson during the course of the Sunday after his execution on the Friday. As you will recall, Mr. Cleopas reports in his account, the women report back to the remaining disciples that they have seen an empty tomb, and then Ms. Mary Magdalena reports that she has indeed seen Mr. Josephson alive and well. So, it's very interesting to note that having all of this very, very convincing evidence, that Mr. Cleopas and his companion are utterly unconvinced of the resurrection of Mr. Josephson. They're walking along the road, they are downhearted, and they were talking about everything that had happened. According to their account, they are joined on the road by an individual whom they do not recognize and who claims to have absolutely no knowledge of what had happened in Jerusalem that weekend, which is really quite remarkable because it was all very public and very well advertised. So they're walking along the road, and this gentleman starts to talk to them about the Jewish scriptures. Your Graces will remember that the Jews, a rather barbaric tribe, have a single God rather than Your Graces' pantheon, and they have a single holy book in which are recorded the words of one of their prophets. Moses, I believe, is some other such name, and then some prophets, people who claim to have a direct line to their one God. Not a proper set of prophets amongst them. They're all bothered about social justice rather than about anything important, such as kingship and other wonderful things that Your Graces petition the gods over. So Mr. Josephson, allegedly Mr. Josephson, is speaking to these two and explains to them why the events that had happened in Jerusalem should have to have happened. And at this stage, the two still do not suggest that they have recognized the individual, suggesting it is not indeed Mr. Josephson, but somebody else. This person continues on their way, but is stopped by Mr. Cleopas and his companion and invited to tea. It is only at the conclusion of the supper, when the visitor, hence heretofore unnamed, unrecognized, takes bread and breaks it, that they claim that suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him and he disappeared from their sight. quite a ridiculous description, Your Graces. Merely, I mean, people don't just get better after execution, and people don't disappear and reappear. And certainly, Miss Magdalena and these people do not seem to have recognised Mr. Josephson. He doesn't appear to have appeared in any form that was convincing to them. It is rather strange. But, excuse me, Your Graces, I appear to have picked up a chill. The hypercaust in my quarters is currently being repaired, and it's really rather cold. So I do apologise for my sniffles. Mr. Clopas and his companion then run all the way back to Jerusalem, another 11 miles in the dark. Now, it is a full moon because the Jewish pagan festival of Passover takes place at the full moon. Lord alone knows what they do. There are all sorts of rumours about what they do to sheep during this Passover festival. Your Graces will be quite horrified, I'm sure. But they return to Jerusalem, and there they claim to have found those who saw Mr. Josephson, allegedly, that evening. All of this has happened on that first Sunday. And again, Your Graces, this account is bizarre in its detail. They make no bones of the fact that they didn't suddenly recognise Mr. Josephson as he walked along the road with them. They didn't think it was Mr. Josephson when he taught them, allegedly taught them, of the events that led up to his execution and recovery. It was only at the breaking of bread, and here is a really interesting detail, Your Graces, because we do have reports, you'll find them in Appendix 4 and Appendix 5, of an event that happened just before Mr. Josephson's arrest, where he appears to have taken the Jewish Passover meal, which involves remembering their rescue from slavery some thousands of years before, and Mr. Josephson appears to have subverted it to some extent, and suggested that bread represented his body and wine represented his blood, and that they should, and I quote, Your Graces, eat of his flesh and drink of his blood. Now, it's clear that the disciples of Mr. Josephson didn't actually consume the body of Mr. Josephson. No, that would be too dreadful to contemplate. But it does appear that this symbolic act is very quickly taken on a huge significance for the followers of Mr. Josephson, because it is in the breaking of the bread that they recognize Mr. Josephson, allegedly. It is a curious account, and I have to say, Your Graces, like all of the others, does not portray Mr. Josephson's disciples in any particularly positive fashion. It does not provide a compelling account of the resurrection of Mr. Josephson, and yet it bears the hallmarks of truthful testimony. I will reflect on this with Your Graces next week when we speak about Mr. Thomas Didymus, and reflect on what does appear to me to be a fairly inescapable conclusion regarding the thoughts of Mr. Josephson's disciples. So I leave Your Graces to consider further the events on the road to Emmaus, and I hope that my reflections are helpful in your deliberations. This Senate shall rise!